Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your Cybersecurity Series. My name is Vlad and I'm here to help you and support you in your cybersecurity journey, even if perhaps you don't have a technical background. Today, this is episode 36 and we are continuing our series on risk management. In the previous episode, I told you all about how and why is it really important to adopt a risk-based approach. What does it really mean? And we saw that it relies on essentially three components. First, defining the risk appetite, meaning what are we really ready to lose in case of incident or the worst case scenario. Second, implementing a risk management framework, so perhaps with ISO 2705 in the context of cybersecurity. And third, going on and conducting those cybersecurity risk assessments. And that's our topic of the day. We are going to see how can we assess cybersecurity risks with one of the approaches currently available on the market, which is EBIOS RM, RM standing for Risk Manager. So, without further ado, having a look a bit at the philosophy of EBIOS RM. So, first, it's a method that is openly public and accessible on the market. You can check the ANSI website. So, the ANSI is the French regulator when it comes to cybersecurity, or the French authority rather than regulator. They provide a lot of content and a lot of guides on different aspects. It can be about hardening, about configurations, but they do also provide this method when it comes to cybersecurity risk assessment. And I'm not saying that because it's a French one, but honestly, it's one of the greatest and most comprehensive I found on the market. What's different perhaps with EBIOS RM compared to other methods is that it implements and embeds, so to speak, both compliance and risk scenarios approaches. In the previous episode, I told you about the distinction in between the two. When we have a compliance approach, we are only looking at things from a defense perspective. So we are checking what we have implemented, checking boxes, and every time that there is a gap, this is a potential source of risk, a potential concern. So those non-compliances are immediately translated into risks. However, we don't have really a precise view on whether or not they are exploitable. Whereas when we take the risk scenarios approach, we really put our hat of a cybersecurity adversary and we are really thinking from an attacker mindset. What could we do? What could we achieve in order to disrupt the company, extort some money, or stuff like that? So it's really using those two combination of defense and attack mindsets that we can have great results with EBIOS RM. So just to dive a bit on this slide, so the approach through conformity is actually done in two steps. First one is about the basic principles and hygiene, which is the lower stage of the pyramid. The idea is that you are going to ask your business about key elements of cybersecurity. So, for example, do they have a backup policy? How are they managing the removable media? How are they administrating their workstation or their servers? So, really classic questions that you would find, and depending of course on the answers, if they have not implemented backups, if they allow any device to be plugged in onto their workstation, or if they are using shared accounts for administration, those are already pointers that the maturity is not so high, and of course these are additional risk elements or risk factors. Then in the middle, you have the regulatory and standards framework. The idea is that you can use, depending on the industry of the company you are working for, you can use different standards. For example, if you're in Europe and if the company or the perimeter that you are reviewing is subject to personal identifiable information, so PII, you might look at GDPR, so the General Data Personal Data Regulation. You can have a look at that, and it's kind of giving you ideas of what the company should have already implemented. And again, those non-compliances will be potential risk factors. If you are in the banking industry or in the financial industry overall, there are some standards like PCI DSS, which is really about how do you manage payment card information. If you are in the automotive industry, there is TISAX. If you are in the aerospace and defense, there is the EASA, who is publishing a lot of content as well, like Part IS. Some of them are regulations, some of them are just standards that are not mandatory or enforceable, but they are good references that you can use. And we will see in the next episode some of them, so I'm not going to dive too much today. And finally, at the top, you have what EBIOS RM is calling the advanced, or let's say the digital risk assessment approach through scenarios. So this is what we are going to look at mostly today. How does it fit overall? Basically, EBIOS RM is an approach based on 5 workshops conducted with the business. And that's also one of the key differences with some of the other approaches. The idea is to get immediately the sponsorship and also the validation from the business. Because if you are conducting those assessments on your own as a cybersecurity professional, you are having a high risk that your assessment is going to be entirely rejected because you don't have the view from the business, you don't really understand what they are doing or what are their key stakes. You don't have a precise view on how they work. And in the end, they will not appreciate or they will not validate your results because it would have been done without really consulting them. Whereas with this EBIOS RM approach, yes, it is quite workshop intensive, and we will see that. However, you kind of co-design or co-construct the results together with business representatives, which is why I think it's one of the most, let's say, realistic way of reaching a result altogether. In workshop one, I know it's tiny, but basically all the pictures are coming from the EBIOS RM guide. It's the version 1.0 that is currently available in English. You can check the ANSI website and it's easily findable. So workshop one is about establishing the scope and the security baseline. So answering those two first layers of the pyramids and trying to understand exactly what has already the company or the perimeter that you're working for, what did they already implement. And then you can see the red overlay, the red box is all those workshops about really finding the right approach, the right mindset in terms of attacker. So workshop two is deciding who we are up against, who are those threat actors and what do they want. If you are not familiar with this concept, you can go back to my episode 6 where I tell you all about the different archetypes of threat actors. Workshop three is about looking not only at your company or your perimeter, but really looking beyond at the entire ecosystem. So, who are the customers, suppliers, or other companies that you are interacting with, and how could they perhaps be of an influence when it comes to cybersecurity? Could you get attacked through one of them typically? Workshop 4 is really about a deep dive into the technical aspects. So here we are going to look at the servers, we are going to look at the data flows and understand what are the elementary actions that could be performed by an external or internal hacker and how could they proceed with their end game. Workshop 5 is really about risk treatment, and we will come back to that right after. You can also look that it's slightly different versions of the timeline. So workshop 1 and workshop 5, so the identification of the baseline and the risk treatment plan, it's mostly what we call a strategic cycle, meaning that it's not something that you would review very often, perhaps every 3 years, because your assumptions are not going to change. However, when it comes to the technical part, especially workshop 4, this is something you might want to review quite or let's say more frequently because maybe your application or the your subject of study has changed a lot. Maybe there were modifications, maybe there were major changes, meaning that there would be new or changes in the ways that hackers could find their way into your infrastructure. So those would have to be updated perhaps on a yearly basis. That would be more relevant. But now I will just show you again how it all connects together. So we have the workshop 2 where we define actually who we are fighting against. So those are called the risk origins in EBIOS RM, so the threat actors, and what are their target objectives? What do they want? Are they interested in money, confidential information, extortion, just sneaking in our premises and getting some I don't know strategic advantage on the market? Do they want to disrupt our operations? Do they want to get a hold of some of our company secrets? Do they want to ruin our reputation? So those kind of objectives are interesting because they drive the discussion, and we are going to find strategic scenario that corresponds to those objectives. Workshop 4 is about, of course, defining operational attack routes, and workshop 5 we are going to have the resulting risk scenario. Again, we are talking about cybersecurity risks. So, as I told you in the previous episodes, there are two key characteristics that we need to look at: the impact and the likelihood. The impact will be defined in workshop 1, and the likelihood will be the result of the workshop 4 once we have a clear understanding of what is going on from a technical aspect. And now we will go through each of the workshops step by step. All right, welcome to workshop one. Through this series of workshop, I'm going to take the same example as the EBIOS RM manual, which is a ANSI guide version 1.0 that you can find on their website. Here, they take a concrete example with a biotech company that would be manufacturing vaccines. So we will see how we perform a cybersecurity risk assessment on that company level. Again, in the next videos, I will give you other examples so that you can perhaps better relate. But the idea is just to walk you through each of the key steps and give you a high level overview of who are the key stakeholders that we reach out to and what are the main actions that are being performed. So, workshop one starts with the identification of the key assets. So, we are mapping on the one side business assets and supporting assets. The difference is that business assets are to be understood as very high level, the main processes or the main information that the company uses on a daily basis. So, here they basically gave two examples: the research and development, so the R&D process, or the manufacturing vaccines process. There could be others. There could be, for example, a key DNA information that would be like a third business asset. There could be also a publication process for uh, perhaps trying to get some funds from governments or funds from private equity companies. So you could invent as many business processes as you would like. The idea is that it has to map what's happening within the company and what are the key perhaps functions or departments in the company. Every time, of course, it would be interesting to identify who is the key entity or the key person responsible for that activity. So in the context of the R&D, that would be here the pharmacist. In the context of manufacturing the vaccine, the responsibility would fall on a production manager. And both of them contribute to the single mission that is highlighted here in orange: identify and manufacture vaccines. Sometimes it's interesting also to take some note about the description. For example, in the R&D, just so we understand what it's really about, it's about vaccine research and development activity with the identification of antigens, the production of antigens, and of course that includes fermentation, purification, inactivation, filtration, storage, preclinical assessment, clinical development, all those key steps for the research. And on the other end, for the manufacturing vaccines, it's about filling the syringes and conditioning, labeling, packaging, and sending out those syringes on the market. Once you have done the business assets, you are trying to identify the technical components that are supporting that. So we are talking about the endpoints, the servers, the workstations, the databases, all the technical components that are either enabling the processes or storing the key information that you have identified as a business asset. So storing or supporting the processing of, it depends how thorough you want to be. So first, for example, in the R&D, we can see we have three types of different supporting assets. We have desktop application servers, which are internal and that are managed by the IT department. And we have desktop application servers external, which are managed by the laboratories, which are our peers and suppliers in this case. We also have the antigen production systems, which are again a set of IT equipment and machines that make it possible to produce antigens, and that's operated directly by laboratories. For our production systems, here we can also say that they are a supporting asset for the manufacturing vaccines. So you can find sometimes the same supporting assets that is mapped to different business assets. But that doesn't really matter. It's important to have this mapping. It doesn't matter if a single supporting asset is impacted for both. On the contrary, it's quite interesting later on in the exercise when we define operational scenarios. Once you have done that, you are going to ask the key business focal points some of the questions about what is their most feared event, what are they afraid about when it comes to cybersecurity, focusing on the CIA properties, meaning confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And for that, of course, you need a grid, so a scale of impact. Here in the EBIOS RM, they give an example of a four-step scale going from G1 minor until G4 critical, but of course that would have to be adapted to any company or any department that you are working for. And typically you would find some key thresholds about what does it mean to have a minor impact versus significant, serious, or critical. So perhaps for one company or for one branch, $10,000 of damage is already something significant, but perhaps for a different company, it starts at $1 million. It really depends on the business and the type of assets. To give you an example of the question, so in the previous slide, we saw that the pharmacists are the key people responsible for the R&D development. So we would take one representative, or at least the head of pharmacy department, and we would ask him some question about the R&D process. Maybe the type of answer that we get is what is shown here on the slide on the right side. We would get perhaps different feared events. First one being a loss of destruction of analysis and research information resulting in a high impact, particularly on the company's future marketing authorization procedure. So here, that's one example, and you can see that there are different bullet points in terms of impact, because that's the tricky part. It's not always easy to have a quantified estimation of the impact in terms of euros or dollars, like in terms of currency. Sometimes it's a bit more uh, qualitative. So you might need different triggers, like what's the impact in terms of reputation, in terms of finance, in terms of internal cost, in terms of governance, in terms of market perception, in terms of brand. So you would have all those different criteria in order to distinguish whether it is a critical severity, a serious severity, significant, or minor. So here you can see that for the first field event, they say that it would impact on the mission and the services of the organization. It would have also an impact on the cost of development. It would have an impact on the organization's governance. They are also giving you other examples like alteration of analysis and research information resulting in wrong vaccine formula. So that, of course, that would be critical on the safety. But here, overall, they believe that the severity would be level 3 for different reasons again. There could be also legal impact, impact on the image and trust. Third example would be leaking of the company's analysis and research information. Of course, you would lose your competitive advantage over that. And fourth, the interruption of the vaccine test phases for more than 1 week, resulting in certain delays. And this one was estimated at only a severity of 2. But again, that would really rely on the perception of the business. And that's where you need to understand that EBIOS RM is extremely strong and different from other methods. Those answers are coming directly from the business. It's not something that the cybersecurity team can change. Our job and our role is to make them think about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So if you look at the table here, the first one is a question of availability of those analyses. The second one, the alteration, is about integrity. The third one, leaking the company, is about confidentiality. And the last one is, again, an availability issue where we lose like a week of time of production worth and test worth. So those are different ideas that you can work with the business in order to define. Once you have done that, you are going to do the final step of the workshop one, which is going through the cyber hygiene and compliance standards. So here you have to understand what are the applicable standards to this business, and you will again proceed with some standard question to understand where do they stand in terms of backup policy, in terms of access rights. So you are going to ask several questions. And here in the guide, they just give you an example. Perhaps in the context of this vaccine manufacturing company, maybe they are using sometimes shared accounts that are non-nominative. So that's quite interesting because we know that, well, to manage the ERP, which is a critical resource, maybe there is something that hackers could exploit. Maybe again, the backup policy is not so much defined. So maybe there is a potential risk that some of the backups would be either non-existing or non-functional if a system is damaged. So those are again elements that we will reuse later on in workshop number 4. That's it for workshop 1. Let's move into workshop 2. All right, workshop 2 is about taking assumptions on our cybersecurity adversaries. So who would want to attack our company and why? What would be their motives? What would be their end game? So if you are not familiar with the concept of threat actors, please go back to episode 6 where I gave you some of the archetypes. We talked about the competitors, the activists, the insiders, nation states, and so on and so forth. So please have a look and then you can come back here so it's better, or at least you will have more information to understand properly. So what we call threat actors so far in the EBIOS RM, they call that risk origins. And you can see that here they made a short list with three different risk origins. Because the activist can appear twice, but again, he will have different target objectives, and that really changes the mindset of the attacks. So perhaps the activist is about sabotaging the national vaccination campaign, or could be disclosing information on animal tests, for example. A competitor could be about information theft, and a cyber terrorist could be about altering the composition of the vaccines for bioterrorist purposes. We could imagine others. They could be, again, nation states, or they could be a cybercrime looking after extortion or stealing key data against a ransom. But again, this is just a limited example. I don't want to go through the entire list. Once we have identified some risk origins that are relevant to us, and we do that not with the business this time, but only with cybersecurity professionals, ideally a CISO or a person that performs threat intelligence to give us some insights on who do we see on the market currently targeting equivalent companies or companies within the healthcare industry or biotech industry. That would be preferable. Then we can try to evaluate in a qualitative manner, so like low, medium, high, or plus, 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 whatever you want. You could evaluate their motivation, resources, and activity. That's very interesting to understand that there needs to be a proportionality in between the attackers that you're facing and your own security measures with your own budget and resources, because you cannot defend yourself against any type of hackers. You need to understand that, well, who are you facing exactly, and what are the key elements you want to strictly protect, versus perhaps realizing that you are against a too large opponent for you to digest. So here in this case, for the biotech company, we want to protect ourselves against activists and also competitors. And we will put all of that in place throughout this scenario. In workshop 3, we are going to look at the ecosystem beyond the company. So not only looking at our systems yet, that will be done in workshop 4, but first we want to see who are the third parties that are interacting with our vaccine manufacturing company. And you can do first a segmentation of the different third parties. So, for example, we have the clients with the healthcare institutions, the pharmacies, the depository or wholesale distributors. Then on the top right, we have the partners, universities, regulators, laboratories. And the bottom left, we have the service providers. So here in this example, the IT are externalized, which is why we have F3 IT service provider. Then we have certain equipment suppliers, because when we produce antigenic or when we assemble the different formulas, there are OT or industrial components that are involved. And finally, we have industrial chemical suppliers, again, for the basic elements that we are going to mix and create the different formulas. What we are going to do on each of them is two different assessments. First one is on the exposure, which essentially characterized to which extent am I exposed or integrated with those third parties? Do they have access to my own systems? How do I interact with them? Do they have access to certain information or certain services that I offer? How easy would it be to disconnect myself from them, or how reliant am I upon some of their services? And then you have the cybersecurity reliability, which essentially measures their own cybersecurity maturity. And you can do that through audits, configuration checks, penetration tests, organizational challenges. I mean, there are different ways that you can measure the maturity of a subcontractor or a partner, but that would be the idea. When you combine those two information and put them into a radar chart that you see here, it's quite interesting, because you see who you should be a bit worried about and who is perhaps too integrated compared to their own cybersecurity maturity. So here, for example, maybe our IT service provider we are very dependent on them because they administrate our servers and databases, and we are not too confident about their cybersecurity maturity. We saw that some non-nominative accounts were being used, so maybe we have some doubts about how they develop certain systems, about how they include cybersecurity in their DevOps lifecycle, or about whether or not they, use administrative accounts for administrative tasks only. So perhaps there have been some warnings or early signs about potential negligence. Again, here we have also laboratories that are close to the danger zone. That could be, again, for different sets of reasons. And that is quite interesting, because even without looking at our own assets, we can perhaps already implement some measures, some security measures on the ecosystem. That would be done through modification of contracts, modification of governance, modifications perhaps of ways of working, but that would be a way to reduce our overall exposure to those companies. Once we do that, we are going to look at different scenarios that could leverage this ecosystem. So we as a company, so we are on the right side, we are the biotech company here in green. We have some R&D information that's extremely attractive as we defined in workshop 2 for certain competitors. But the idea is that the competitors can either attack us directly, so that would be the first arrow, direct exfiltration channel, or if they think about it, maybe they are going to attack us through our ecosystem. So perhaps attacking laboratories with whom we share some portion of our R&D because we need them to perform certain analysis, or maybe the competitor will first attack the IT service provider and then through them gain access to our systems. So that's just to show you that sometimes it's not only about you and your systems as a company, but also the ecosystem and how it could be used against you. And that's exactly the purpose of the workshop 3. All right, and finally, workshop 4, it's about inventing technical attack scenarios, just like you see here. So for example, we are going to draw some elements and draw some arrows to reflect what are the key technical steps this time. So we are really looking within our company, what are some technical elements that hackers could do or attackers could do in order to achieve their objective. So here we have an attacker in red, and the first step would be to take control and deposit fraudulent iframes onto a third-party website. So this website could be any website, but basically it's going to be infected, and that will be a first step of the attack. Then in the blue zone or green zone on the bottom right, we have our company and we have legitimate employees. Those employees, perhaps by mistake or uh, through the course of their job profile, they are going to at some point access that website that was, let's say, compromised. So that's the step 2. We have a site visit and the redirection through the iframe to a malware. So we are going to end up on a fraudulent web page that is going to serve a virus. This virus is, of course, going to infect our workstation and open a backdoor. So from this point at step 3, our workstation from this legitimate employee is unfortunately compromised. Right afterwards, step 4, our attacker is going to take control and deposit certain attack tools. So he's going to come and use his toolbox to further pivot and propagate his attack and propagate the infection. So that the step 5 is going to move from an isolated workstation into the rest of our network and target certain databases or key elements of our infrastructure. And then step 6 will be the data exfiltration. So of course they are going to pull some of our key data and steal the IP, perhaps try to do some extortion. That depends again on the target objective that we have defined in the workshop 2. So this is how it looks, and that's the type of element that you can define as part of the workshop 4. Of course, it has to be aligned with the different let's say, ecosystem scenario that you defined previously. Here it's a different set of example, but just to show you how it could look like. There are also some frameworks that are proposed by EBIOS RM when it comes to framing those attack scenarios. So here, they propose a simple framework with 4 different steps: knowing, entering, finding, and exploiting. And as you can see, it's really about identifying the key actions that a hacker or attacker would perform in order to reach the theft and exploitation of R&D data. So the box at the bottom right in red, this is the end game. This is what they are targeting. This is what they want. The question is, how can they arrive to that part? And so here we see 3 different type of operational scenarios, one in red, one in green, and one in blue. So in red, it starts with open source external reconnaissance, and then it can go through pre-existing channel, or it can go through phishing email to the HR department. It can go through the work council, for example. Then there would be some compromise of a workstation, then internal reconnaissance of the office environment, and then lateralization on the R&D subnetwork, and then perhaps exploitation of a malware that would lead to the creation and maintaining of an exfiltration channel, and then finally they would steal our R&D data. It's a bit complex, but that's something that could be done. Or they could corrupt and perhaps bribe someone from the personnel of the R&D team and immediately have access to our R&D data. That's also something you could do. It's more on the human side, but that's again something that is feasible. Or third, they would do perhaps some advanced external reconnaissance. They would corrupt something on premise like a maintenance service provider, and then they would use a fraudulent USB stick to be plugged in into the R&D station, and then they would find a way to steal and exploit the R&D data. Again, three different aspects. All of them can be taken into account, but it's just again illustrative to show you that we are going to identify the key steps on the attack. And of course, once we have done that, meaning once we have laid out the different attack principles, we need to identify what is the likelihood of that of happening. So either we are going to put a likelihood on each of the box, and that's a very detailed method, or we can find the right balance and take some shortcuts and say that perhaps the scenario one here in red is maybe not very likely, scenario two is perhaps a bit more likely, scenario three, again, we find a different level of the likelihood. So that's really the idea. Once you have the scenarios, you need to apply the likelihood, so either with a technical measurement or a gut feeling or expert feeling. That's how you get the likelihood in your risk scenario. So that's for the workshop 4. And then it's about workshop 5, essentially putting everything back together, mapping the cybersecurity risks. So from the workshop 1, because workshop 1, remember, it was really about identifying the threat, the feared events. So feared event are the boxes here in red. So from the feared event, we had the significance of the severity. So we have this scale from 1 to 4. So we know the impact of the risks. Now, after the workshop 4, we also know the likelihood. So we should be able to position the risk scenario somewhere into this risk matrix. So here, this is just an example of a risk matrix, and there have been different, or let's say 5 different risks that were recorded. So we are in a position to do that. Is it done? Are we done with the exercise? No. Once we do that, of course, we need to define a risk treatment strategy. Some of the risks that are here, like risk number 1 and risk number 3, they are in a red zone that is usually the non-acceptable zone. Those risks, they need to be reduced, they need to be mitigated. So we are trying to push the risks into the orange or even in the green zone if we can, by reducing the severity or reducing the likelihood. How do we do that? Well, we have to define a risk mitigation plan. And of course, it can be different ways. It can be about the governance. It can be about deploying certain elements, deploying new protection. There are different ways. I'm not going to insist too much on this example. It's a heavy screenshot. Feel free to pause the video if you want to look at. Otherwise, you have a very complete set of examples within the ANSI guide version 1.0. That's it for today. It was just to show you the end-to-end approach when it comes to EBIOS RM and how do we identify cybersecurity risks. I hope you enjoyed. I will give you more context and other examples in the coming episodes. See you soon and see you next week. Take care.